So hello, welcome, good afternoon. Thank you for making time at this stage of the book fair. I know that this can be a challenging hour at the book fair because there are quite often drinks receptions waiting. So if you can hold off your warm glass of Prosecco somewhere in the other hall slightly longer, we're delighted to welcome you here to this very special seminar in which we'll be focusing on the exciting and inspirational translation of two anthologies of Kazakh poetry and prose into 6 UN languages as part of Kazakhstan's Rukani Jangaru program, or Contemporary Kazakh Culture in the Modern World. My name's Jane Mann, and I'm the Director of Education Reform at Cambridge University Press, and we're very proud to have been chosen by the National Bureau of Translation to be the English language publisher of these anthologies. I think a great strength of the University of Cambridge, and indeed of all universities, is their ability to foster international partnerships and cross-cultural exchange of knowledge and of relationships. And by opening the door of its literary tradition to the world, Kazakhstan is opening its doors to further kinds of exchange. I don't know if that's you, Ambassador, or me.
Of course, me.
Of exchange, of sharing, and of community. The Rukani Jangaru's program aims for the internationalization of Kazakhstan, both economically and culturally, and these are captured and expressed by these anthologies. So these works will offer Kazakh students and scholars a powerful new source of cultural knowledge and identity, spanning the long history of the nation. But they're also a door through which international students can enter Kazakhstan, students of literature and of culture, and they will facilitate and enable greater comparative study of the country's literary heritage and an opportunity for the world to really learn more about and benefit from its value. This is a good time for translated works. Research commissioned by the Man Booker Prize shows that UK sales of translated works rose last year by 5.5%, and translated fiction now makes up 6% of all fiction published in the UK. Sales of translated short stories and anthologies actually went up by 90% over that period. But as you can imagine, the majority of these works are they're European in origin. And I feel this means that English-speaking cultures and audiences are missing out on a vast wealth of important literature, culture, and art from further afield. As a university press, our mission is to disseminate knowledge and understanding, to make information and texts widely available. So it's with immense pride that we make these texts available for the first time in English, in print, online, and in audio for the benefit of future readers. So we have 4 speakers for you today, each giving their own perspective on this important cultural initiative. Each will speak for 10 minutes, and I'll be strict with you all, before we turn to you to pose questions for our panelists. And if I promise to make time for questions and answers, please will you promise to have some good ones to ask at the end of it. So firstly, we're honored to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Erlan Idrisov, Ambassador to the Republic of Kazakhstan, to United Kingdom and Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Representing Kazakhstan as Ambassador to the United Kingdom since 2017, Ambassador Idrisov has twice been Kazakhstan's Minister of Foreign Affairs and served for 5 years as the country's ambassador to the United States in 2007 to 2012. Ambassador Idrisov has also authored numerous articles himself on Kazakhstan's foreign policy and multilateral diplomacy. Over here we have Rawan Kenjakan, who is director at the National Bureau of Translation, NBT, who, as well as being a social entrepreneur, a politician, and a journalist, is also a diplomat. NBT is one of the largest publishing houses in Kazakhstan, focused on translation of university-level textbooks and non-fiction literature from foreign languages into Kazakh. A Cambridge colleague here, Professor Colleen McLaughlin, is Director of Education Innovation and leader of the Educational Reform and Innovation team at the University of Cambridge. She has a long history of working with Kazakhstan, having been a leading member of the team responsible for the transformation of the entire Kazakh school education system. The team worked very closely with the Ministry of Education and the Innovative Schools Network to establish the Graduate School and of Education at Nazarbayev University. Professor McLaughlin has been involved as an advisor to many governments and NGOs on the personal and social dimensions of schooling. And finally, but not at all least, we have David Cook. David is a poet, founder and co-editor of The High Window. His poems, translations and reviews have appeared widely in the UK, in Ireland and beyond. He's published 5 collections of his poetry, the latest of which is After Hours, and I can personally vouch for that book, having read a copy myself. David is providing literary translation for this project, so he has a deep understanding of the working process and will be able to share some of that with us. I just want to finish my introduction with a thought from the famous 19th century British poet and cultural critic Matthew Arnold. Arnold once said, "Culture is a pursuit of our total perfection by means of getting to know the best which has been thought and said in the world, and through this knowledge, turning a stream of fresh and free thought upon our stock notions and habits." For me, this sums up how important this project is in turning a stream of fresh thought upon the culture of such a fascinating nation as Kazakhstan, and why the concept of a nation choosing to define its culture in the modern world through the window of poetry and prose is such a powerful project. So, Your Excellency, over to you for some thoughts.
Thank you very much for such a wonderful and eloquent introduction. For me, it's a great honor and pleasure to be here. Let me first of all thank the London Book Fair for staging this fantastic global intellectual event. And of course, I'd like to thank our friends in Cambridge University and Cambridge University Press. We have been so lucky to develop many projects together. Education is one of the most important streams of our partnership. Now we go into a fantastic new track of our partnership, letting the British and Western public to know the origins of Kazakhs through their literature. I am very pleased because you mentioned that I wrote numerous articles on international affairs. I would wish to write more on literature, history, culture, because this is my passion. And as ambassador, of course, I'm very proud to observe that knowledge about our part of the world is growing, and the appetite to get that knowledge is growing. Everywhere you go, you see the glimpses of this new appetite. Just to tell you that many Westerns now marvel where we hail from, what we do, and what we have in mind for the future. So this type of project, history, culture related, are at the core of our ambition to become a modern nation. I am very proud that my nation is building the cult of knowledge. You just quoted a very nice quote, and let me tell you that the government of Kazakhstan is cementing the cult of knowledge in Kazakhstan. We have been through many cults in our recent history. We threw away those cults, but we just selected one cult which we want to firmly follow, is the cult of knowledge. This is one of the projects of this type. Unfortunately, the West is so squeamish because of huge volume of information and knowledge about the West, so that there is no time and space for opening new spaces of culture in the world. Therefore, we have to be very competitive and proactive. And I'm very proud that for the first time in Kazakh history, we have a moment of presenting a small portion of Kazakh culture through its literature. Only 30 poets and only 30 prose writers have been selected for this anthology, which in itself is a huge effort. I'm very proud that within a short period of time, within 1 year, we have been able to complete the bulk of the project, and hopefully we'll see the completion of this project in a launch of these 2 anthologies later in the year, in September, in London. I would like to commend all those who took part in this project, of course the great team of Cambridge University Press, but also the authors themselves, of course, and the great pool of translators who never spared their efforts to put their best talents into translating something which is culturally very far from them. They try to get into that culture and history, and I hope they will be successful, and through them many Westerners will be able to understand the fabric of Kazakh nation as it comes into history. We are a young nation, but we are very ancient. Today you can see so many new discoveries which tell that Eurasia and Eurasian steppes and nomadic walk of life has contributed enormously to human history and culture. Just to remind you, the horsemanship and the horse domestication happened 6,000 years ago in the north of modern Kazakhstan. That has also, of course, contributed a lot to the emergence of human race as we know it today. The Indo-European languages are believed to be born in the descent of Eurasian steppe, and these languages are today is the languages of half of the global population. Or the metallurgy, as we know, these metals and all other alloys, the early metallurgy emerged among nomads in the steppes of Great Eurasia. So this type of new knowledges are coming by. I will tell you another project which is coming by is the international Canada-Kazakhstan cooperation on a documentary trilogy on the horses and the history of horses called Echoes, which will be internationally presented in 50 countries late in 2019. There are many other projects. I'm very proud to partner with Cambridge University Press on another book on a fantastic scholar of the 19th century of Kazakhstan, Chokan Valikhanov, and we hope that this book will be presented to the British public next year. So I'm very proud that we are getting friendly support from our British friends, from our Western friends, in trying to promote this cult of knowledge throughout the world, not only throughout the space of Eurasia, but throughout the world. These are the first beginnings of this type of efforts. We hope that being able to read this anthology, pieces of Kazakh poetry, pieces of Kazakh prose, more and more Westerners will develop new appetites to explore further. This is just a small drop to tease their appetites, to go and explore for themselves. The uniqueness of Kazakh literature is outstanding. Kazakhs and nomads are absolutely remarkable in terms of the oral culture. Oral culture is the feature of Kazakh modern literature. It lies at the roots of Kazakh literature. Strong, very, very strong oral tradition in the steppes. Of course, we went through the shorter periods of history when we were part of the Russian literature, Western literature, being illiterate in Western terms. In the 18th and 19th century, Kazakhs became very literate through stalwarts of Kazakh culture like Abai, who introduced Kazakhs to Shakespeare, to Byron, to Pushkin, to Dostoevsky. We then became part of the Soviet Empire, and through that we became masters of the socialist realism. And you can see masterpieces of Kazakh culture during the Soviet period, whether it is in arts or in written literature. So we are now stepping back into a new period, the new period of independence, but we want to rely on our past, because in our blood, in our fabric, we feel those deep roots of that ancient culture which formed so many beautiful pieces of modern history and culture. Therefore, I'm very proud that the government has not spared money to this enormous project to produce best books for the Kazakh public, to learn the best knowledge in other parts of the world, and to dig out what has been hidden from us and from the rest of the world in our ancient history. The project Ruhani Jangaru in Kazakh, in English it is translated the modernization of Kazakh identity. I translate it for myself as the rebirth of Kazakh spiritual rebirth. So we are finding new life in our spiritual past, and we do this not just to please ourselves. this is our firm belief that our future will not be built on strong foundations unless we know our past, our history. Therefore, we are in the exercise of collecting that knowledge, putting it together, letting other people understand where we hail from, so that together we build a very strong future. I thank you very much, and I think Ravan represents a very proud young generation of Kazakhs, born out of the born in the not Soviet period, educated completely differently, speaking 3 languages. He is the bearer of 3 cultures: Kazakh culture, Russian culture, and the Western culture. Therefore, we want to rely on this type of young generation, which will produce the new face of new Kazakhstan of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and some really thoughtful comments there. And an excellent introduction to you, Raun.
Thank you very much. To begin with, I really would like to convey our sincere appreciation to our friends from Cambridge Education Press. I think you are the best partner we could possibly find for this project. And of course, we are really thankful to the ambassador and his team for huge support that we are receiving here. In fact, the project that we are involved in, I am representing an organization called National Bureau of Translation, which is a non-for-profit organization created to several translation projects. But everybody who involved in this project, I'm here with a big team who are working with me for these projects. They're all very passionate about this, not only because of this new text that we produced based on translation work, but it is about making your personal story as a citizen, as a young representative of your nation, being part of bigger nation-building project. This is very important. When what you can do as a person, as a professional, really fits to the process that you involved with your friends, colleagues, peers, and you are doing line by line these texts, and you see how it's become new capacity, new quality of the society, of the nation. So on the one hand, we're trying to build team that are bringing best knowledge, best textbooks from all over the world to Kazakhstan. So there is a project called 100 new textbooks in Kazakh language. So we look for best authors and best textbooks produced in best universities all over the world. We acquire licenses for these textbooks, translate them into Kazakh, and then they are disseminated or distributed for free for all universities within the country. State or private, doesn't matter. So I don't know such projects implemented in other countries. Probably there are, but I haven't heard about this. So 112 universities received 10,000 copies of each textbook for free. And e-versions of the text of those texts, they are available online for free. And in order to do this job, we try to involve everyone who are capable to do this job. And of course, we are learning a lot by doing. I can't say that it's easy job. And we have, or we had before this project, strong community or school of translators. We are building that school of translators and that community by doing these projects. So currently we have already 50 titles translated, printed, and distributed among universities. Right now we are working on the next batch of 30 new titles. So we invite all our friends, colleagues who are interested in this kind of project. We are looking for new titles, for new authors who you think should be translated and represented to our students. But this translation job, it's a two-sided movement. On the one hand, we are trying to bring forward-thinking authors by their textbooks to our auditoriums. But at the same time, we would like to share our culture, our history, our tradition with the rest of the world. Because when we say about competitiveness of the nation, it's about being interesting and attractive enough for your partners and for your friends with something unique that you can bring on the table. And we really believe that we possess that kind of uniqueness. It is our culture, it is our history, it is our oral tradition, it is our literature. So based on that understanding, currently we are working on these two anthologies of contemporary Kazakh literature. So for the first time in our history, 60 authors at the same time are being translated into 6 UN languages: English, Spanish, French, Chinese, Arabic, and Russian. And again, each book are to be printed with a print run of 10,000 copies and distributed in all countries that use these 6 UN languages as an official language. So we are talking about more or less 100 countries with a total population of 3 billion people. And of course, everybody are very excited. Authors, translators, people who are involved in this project. I think by doing this kind of translation work, we are also building really strong connection between our creative communities. So authors from Kazakhstan, they are introduced to the translators in 6 different capitals. And they are building personal connections, professional connections, and thinking and discussing other projects that can be implemented. And I think by doing this, we are bringing a lot of interesting and new ideas and stories to our friends. But at the same time, our authors, our translators are learning a lot. So I'd like to thank again all of you who are helping and supporting us with this project. And I'd like to invite new friends, partners who are interested in doing these projects, this kind of projects. So this is the first time when we are going public on this level, and I think this is really exciting for all of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Raoul. Professor McLaughlin.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. I'm very, very delighted and honoured to be here. My involvement is not in this extremely ambitious project, which I have to say does not surprise me at all after my experience of Kazakhstan. So I've been involved in what was the modernization. It was called the modernization of the education system. It wasn't a reform in the traditional sense, and that in many ways is the few words I want to say to you are going to be about that. It was an evolution, but going a long, long way back, Kazakhstan has learned the value of working with others, and particularly about looking back and looking forward. And I've only just begun to realize that that idea goes back a very, very long way. I'll share some of those ideas with you. So if we could go to the first slide. So President of Kazakhstan said, we need to look into the past in order to understand the present and foresee the future. So what Kazakhstan did was to be extraordinarily ambitious, to say we are going to change we're going to develop, not we're going to change, we're going to develop our whole education system by looking forward to the best of education in the world, and we're going to learn from it, but we're not going to abandon the past. We are going to build on what we've done. The curriculum is extraordinarily ambitious. It is now, every child in Kazakhstan will now learn 3 languages. They have reformed, developed the curriculum to turn it into a global curriculum. They have changed the assessment system. So a hugely ambitious task. recently there was a new index. It's called the the Future Education Index. And it's produced by The Economist. And it's judged to be which countries educate best for the future. Kazakhstan wasn't in the top 10, but it was cited as the country that was punching above its weight, that it was making so much progress educationally. I'm sorry about this, rebuilding of the house that's going on next to us here. But it was said to be a country that would not long be far from achieving the top 10. And that is, in a sense, the ambition of Kazakhstan. What I want to do, to the next slide, please, is I want to show, I've been going to Kazakhstan for a long time. I often stay in a hotel I'm very fond of, which looks out on a statue of a man called Abai, who's already been mentioned tonight. And I've been encouraged, I've even been given books by him, and it's only recently that I've really started to read them. And I started to realize the deep connections between Abai's thinking, a very visionary man, a man much honored in Kazakhstan, a philosopher, tribal leader, and the current work that's going on. I want to just share some of those with you. So, the first characteristic is the emphasis on education, which already we've heard from the ambassador, that education is so highly valued, and it is like water. People want to drink of it as much as they can in Kazakhstan. And it is seen, Abai, I read this morning that Abai saw education as the route to freedom and also the route to dignity. So that's one of the things culturally that I find imbued centrally in Kazakh culture. The trilingualism comes back from Abai's time. He encouraged people to read Russian because, as you said, it opened up the world of literature, not necessarily because it was Russian, although that was seen as important, but because it was access to learning, it was access to knowledge. So here we have a modern education system being built on that same premise, looking back and saying we must build on our Kazakh culture as well as our Russian heritage. And learning and culture were seen by Abai as the key to the world heritage. And that's the ambition Kazakhstan has, and it's the ambition we're starting to see fulfilled, that it wants to play on the world stage. It wants to be a bridge between the East and the West. And this was another idea of Abai, that we should look to the East, especially for the spiritual dimensions, but we should also look to the West. The other concept is, and I've heard it tonight, I've heard it from you tonight, is the emphasis on partnership and community. That what people do is, the community is more important than the individual. And this idea is one that Abai himself wrote very, very strongly about, and I think we still see. Although I think some of the struggles Kazakhstan is having on a small scale are to do with the Western emphasis on individualism. So there are many practices that inform schooling from the West, notions of the curriculum, notions of pedagogy, notions of active learning, and so on. But there are also many practices that inform schooling today that come from the past. One which I think we now look at with some envy from this side of the world is the concept, literally translated as upbringing. And that is about the holistic development of the whole child. And this is something that schools in Kazakhstan are taking very, very seriously. Next slide, please. So here we have a highly successful modern curriculum that in 8 years has been rolled out from 22 experimental schools and 1 experimental university, which we worked with, to the whole system. It will be complete this year. That's an extraordinary achievement. That every school in Kazakhstan will be working to a new curriculum, new assessment, and high ambitions. I think it is an astounding story of progress, quickly. And it's one of the things I think I also learned in Kazakhstan, that progress happens at the rate of riding a very fast horse. And that image has always stayed with me, that's how they do things in Kazakhstan. And we sit around saying, no, you can't possibly do that in that time. And it does happen. So I think I'm going to stop there. I think I'm going to say many people see what's happened in schooling as Kazakhstan as us in the West going out and developing something that we did. It's not like that at all. It's been an evolution, and it's been built on deep cultural notions from the past. And the organizations of NIS and NU were established to do that, to lead and develop a vision that turns out is about 150 to 200 years old. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. And I think there's a lot to be learnt there, and a lot of similarities that can be drawn about progress in the Kazakh nation now. So, David, over to you for our final comments.
Right, I was one of 6 people, I think, involved in translating 30 Kazakh poets. So I thought it would be most useful if I said a few words regarding the challenges of translating Kazakh poetry into English, and to look at the various possibilities and options that are available for people who want to achieve that. So my thoughts come together under the heading, really, translation, the art of the possible. And there are a couple of major challenges involved. One, I think, is the essential nature of the Kazakh language and the English language. I don't want to get too boringly technical, but Kazakh is what is known as an agglutinative language, a bit of a mouthful. English is thought of as an analytic language. In ordinary English, what that tends to mean is that in Kazakh you get lots of polysyllabic words that are packed with meaning. You get little bits and you add them together and form longer words. In English, meaning tends to get broken down into smaller units. And how this impinges upon poetry is that Kazakh poetry and English poetry, they both have music, they both have rhythm and cadence, but they're different. I suppose, to use a musical analogy, English poetry tends to be more staccato, whereas Kazakh poetry tends to be more legato and flows in a different kind of way. Another important element in this is that it is infinitely more easier to use rhyme in Kazakh than it is in English. You don't see an awful lot of 21st century English poetry which rhymes. You can do it, but it is not the norm, and it's very easy if you use rhyme to sound like you're some throwback to the Romantic era or are writing some kind of pastiche. So these are issues that you have to think about when you are presenting poetry in a form which is palatable for a different audience. Another thing that is very interesting in Kazakh and all the Turkic languages, and also distant cousins to the Turkic languages like Hungarian and Finnish, is that they have something called vowel harmony. And when they're building up these polysyllabic words, the vowels have to be molded so that they all work together. And as a poet in English, this is something you have to kind of consciously strive for. So I'm not in a position to write poetry in Kazakh, but it must be wonderful to write poetry in a language where this kind of vowel harmony is kind of hardwired into the very language. The other thing that is a great challenge is that mention has already been made of the oral tradition of Kazakh poetry. Kazakh poetry's got a very long oral tradition, and oral poetry tends to use certain forms and have certain tropes and have a kind of rhetoric of its own. And this is quite difficult to replicate in a language where the poetry has been written down and printed over hundreds and even 1,000. You have to go back to the Anglo-Saxons to get anything in English, in the English tradition, which it works in a similar way. And when you're translating the Kazakh poetry, one is tempted all the time to be editing certain things, and sometimes you have to edit them. There are lots of repetitions, which is part of the oral tradition. You get it in Homer. In Homer, you expect lots of repetition, and it's accepted because it's accepted as being part of the oral tradition. That doesn't necessarily work so well when you're writing it down to publish it in a book. And I think all of us who translated the Kazakh poetry had to come to terms with all sorts of traditional rhetoric and traditional images which have an immediate emotional impact upon Kazakh readers, because they breathed it all in ever since, they were children. Whereas an English reader has got to kind of decode all of this stuff. And in passing, I will say that Asiya from the MBT was absolutely invaluable in helping us all out, because sometimes we would read something and we would just be completely stumped as to the significance of what this image really meant and was really trying to say. I didn't look at my watch, Jay, but I think I'm not doing too bad there at the minute time. So this is all stuff that you have to deal with, and I think another part of the oral tradition is that the syntax, the way words are put together, is somehow, it seems very freewheeling and associative for an English reader. And I was trying to think of a phrase that would sort of make sense of this. There's a kind of an emotional syntax rather than a purely logical syntax. As an English reader, you want one thing to lead to another in a way that you're used to. A lot of the Kazakh poems, and again, I have to be careful because I didn't translate Kazakh poetry. I translated literal translations of Kazakh poetry into English. So one has to sort of think, well, I've got to mould this into a form which is palatable in English. So I'm just going to finish by thinking about the possibilities that are available to somebody who wants to translate Kazakh poetry, or indeed any kind of poetry. And I would present, first of all, two extremes of a spectrum. There's not a lot of Kazakh poetry, if any at all, translated into English. There's an awful lot of 20th century Russian poetry which is translated into English. And I'm not going to say that Russian poetry is the same as Kazakh poetry. It isn't. But, for example, all the great 20th century Russian poets all use strict meter, and they rhyme. They rhyme very, very strictly. And English people are often amazed when they hear of great modern 20th century Russian poets, thinking, what, they write in verses that rhyme? I mean, modern poets don't do that. Well, they do in Russian. And one way of translating this is the sort of what I would call the academic tradition. You get a lot of Russian poetry translated into English by people who are not necessarily poets. They're academics, they know their Russian literature, and they are sort of totally focused on replicating the form. And very, very often these poems are unreadable. Because if you choose a word because it rhymes, then you've got to compromise on meaning. And often the poems have got a very, very old-fashioned kind of feel about them. The other extreme goes back to people like Ezra Pound, and particularly the American poet Robert Lowell, who in the 60s brought out a book called Imitations, and it was a huge success in its day. I've never been over impressed with it, to be perfectly honest, because it seems to me that it's all about the translator and not really that much about the stuff that's being translated. So sometimes if you look at, say, a Robert Lowell translation, it looks like a kind of average Robert Lowell poem, but then when you go back to whoever, Baudelaire or Rimbaud, whoever he's translating, you think, this has got nothing to do with Rimbaud. This is all about Robert Lowell. It's not anything to do with Baudelaire. So it's tempting for somebody who is a poet and who writes their own work to, every time you come up against something that is hard to replicate in English, you are tempted to think, well, I could do a much better job on this and make it work for me. But I don't think that is entirely appropriate when you're contributing to what is going to be a standard anthology for decades and perhaps a century to come. It's not really about you as a translator, it is about the work. And I think you have to kind of steer a middle course. What you produce has got to be musical, it's got to be elegant, it's got to be expressive, it mustn't look it mustn't be full of what we call translatorese. So you've got to try and be as true and as close to the original as you can without it ending up being something a little bit outlandish, incomprehensible, incoherent. So at the end of the day, it's all about compromise. So if you can't do something perfectly, then one solution is don't bother doing it at all. But for all the reasons that we've discussed so far, it is worth doing. And what we produce in English cannot be exactly the same as what was originally produced in Kazakh, but we can make it as close as possible. And to quote a Russian poem, Boris Pasternak, you've got to get to the heart of the matter. You've got to try and get the essence and make it as musical and as cadenced and, to use an old-fashioned word, as beautiful as you can in the new language.
Thank you, David. That's a really helpful walkthrough. So to you, our patient audience, do you have any questions for the panelists? Yes, one over here. Is there a microphone, or can you shout? Oh, there's a microphone, sorry. Thank you.
I am one of translators of the poetry, and I thought one thing which is missing today is the sound of Kazakh language. So very quickly, the shortest poem I could find by my favorite poet, a young poet called Yerlan Junus, and it's called in Kazakh Kutu, in Angliscam, waiting. In English, waiting. So I'll read it very quickly. Kazakh first. Bir ayın alıp soğam деп күзге қарай соға алмадым. Сізге де, достарға да. Өмір ауып барады басқа арнаға, көңіл ауып тұрған мен сізге қарай. Күз келді ме дегенше қырда күйді, жол айналып дүние-ай түсе алмай жүр. Құс айналып дүние-ай ұша алмай жүр. Жер бетінде шеткері тұрған үйді. Жалт еткенде жаңбырлы, жанарда аспан, тағы басып бір қадам алға қарай, тағы қарап тұрмысыз жолға қарай, терезенің пердесін жаба алмастан. And now it's my humble English version. Waiting. I'll be back by the autumn. That was my promise to you and friends, but I haven't kept my word. My heart is reaching out to you, but life carries me in a different direction. The step burned out while waiting for the autumn. What a pity. Winding roads can't lead me to you. Birds are circling around the house in the middle of nowhere, unable to leave it. Sky flashes momentarily in your rainy eyes. You come again to the window, looking again at the road, unable to draw the curtain. Thank you very much.
That's a fantastic addition. Thank you very much indeed for sharing. Any more questions?
Hello, my name is Simon. I translated some of the prose, I don't pretend to the level of people like David. This is not a question, it's just an observation. I've been translating with my fellow translator Simon here, Kazakh works of Kazakh literature for the last 3 years. And with this particular project, the benefit of this project was that I don't translate from Kazakh, I translate from Russian. And there's always in the background a sense that, am I producing an accurate English text? And the difference with this project is the team behind the project is that, and David alluded to this, and I was on the one hand not very surprised but equally amazed that I wanted to highlight the input of one particular person who's sitting in front of me, Asia. With each of my works, she ensured that not only was my translation accurate, but it also reflected the Kazakh spirit of each of the authors. So one thing that's always important in translating any work, be it prose or poetry, is to reflect the voice of the author. And I wanted to say thank you very much to Asia in particular for her input in ensuring that that aim was achieved. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I think we would echo that I have never worked on a project before where it's been required to have a cultural induction. And that meant listen to the music, eat the food, see the sights, hear the sounds. And I think that really is reflected in the seriousness with which the team expects us to take this on board. So I echo that. Yes, Peter.
Can I just pick up both on what you were saying, Jane, and also what the ambassador was saying, which is how important the context is to understand the works of literature. And the ambassador was talking about how important it is to understand history, to understand where we are now. And how can we help in this project the readers to get that sense of Kazakh history and Kazakh culture, to be able to give them the context to read these works and give them more richness from what they can get from it.
Would you like to respond, Raoul, or Your Excellency?
Well, that's a very important question, and of course I told you that we have selected 60 authors, and this is just a small drop in the ocean of what we have currently today, and of course it doesn't represent what we had in the past. We come from the oral culture, and we have folk epics actually, which form the bulk of our understanding of the world. And for anyone to understand Kazakhs, you have to go and understand those epics. They're in the blood of every child in Kazakhstan. The job was very difficult. You know that when you have two lawyers, three opinions emerge, right? Similarly, I do a lot of cultural events, and I discovered that when you have two musicians, many of them do not recognize each other as a musician. Therefore, there was a very difficult administrative job to select those works, those authors, because they are numbering in thousands. But the idea was to try to select in such a way as to reflect the different strata in our literature world. Of course, we picked up on most famous, outstanding modern writers and poets of modern times, but they're in their ages now. But we wanted to also bring something fresh, new poets and writers who represent something close to the post-Soviet Kazakhstan, or those who were at the end of the Soviet period life of Kazakhstan. That was an effort to reflect how they interpret the history, because the elder writers and poets, they were understanding history in their own way. The youngsters, they took the history in a completely different way. But they're both Kazakh, and they have those instincts. That is a very difficult exercise to choose only 60 out of 1,000. And of course, you know that many were left unsatisfied and maybe hurt. But we had to go through this exercise, because this is the first effort, very, if you like, altruistic effort on the part of Kazakh government to help the Kazakh public and most importantly the foreign, the public outside Kazakhstan to understand our roots. I hope that this project is a success. I hope that, but my bigger hope is that this project will be the how do you call it, the incubator for something bigger in the future. I trust this very much. This is the first important step, of course, as the first pancake may turn into something very uneatable. So we hope that this is can be quite edible. This anthology will be quite edible. And let me remind you that this is the first ever effort of this type. There were individual translations, not to the standard which is accepted by Western public. We are very proud that we do this with Cambridge University Press. Cambridge University Press adds authority to this whole effort. If Cambridge has taken up this exercise, many readers will understand that this is something to give an eye at least to. Then they will discover all the things. Of course, I was working as translator myself. I understand that you never will be able to produce the original. Original is original. Any translation, and particularly double translation, of course, carries lots of damages to the original, right? But the spirit, the roots, the core can be delivered through translators. Therefore, I don't think that by only one anthology, Westerners will be able to understand a very complex history of Kazakhs. But that will be my hope, that this anthology will be a very strong encouragement for those who want to know the human history.
I think it's important to say that, I mean, obviously when I was talking about translating it, I was sort of emphasizing the adjustments that you have to make. But I don't know about the prose, but I know from the poetry that it is so imbued with Kazakh culture that basically if you kind of just go with the flow, I'm far more in tune with the things that I thought were strange at the beginning. By the time you've translated, you know, sort of 8 poems from a dozen poets, you kind of get on that kind of frequency. And if the project is worth doing at all, you get beyond the superficial cultural differences, and you know, it's just the human themes beneath it, you know, love, suffering, parenthood, whatever. It's all the same, it's just wrapped up in a different package, really.
Let me also add one example. History and culture is so unique, and each and every nation in the world is unique in that sense. Kazakh language is absolutely a fantastic language, very rich language. It's quite different from English, of course, although we may belong to one ancient Indo-European family. But, for example, in Kazakh language we have 1,000 words for a horse, because horse is heart of our culture. It's part of us. Many Westerners, you know, are surprised and shocked that we eat horse meat. We eat horse meat eaters. But when I explain to them the roots of that, that it is part of our culture from time immemorial, and that our mothers care as their babies at birth with horse names. It's so unique. No other nation may understand this, you know, but this is our root, this is our culture, and we understand this, and we hope that this will be understood by others too. And we patiently try to explain this, how it happened. It's unique. I was also astonished by the interweaving of histories. I was in Ribchester, near Manchester. There is a small Roman museum there. And the history is that when England was the northern outskirts of the Roman Empire, at the time of Mark Aurelius, he hired 8,000 nomadic warriors, Sarmatians. They came over here around York area, and they were protecting the northern outskirts of the Roman Empire. Of course, then the Roman Empire, because of the nomads again, this collapsed. But those 8,000 Sarmatians stayed there. they remained there, they mingled with the local public, they became part of this culture. And I was astonished to find a few artifacts in the Ribchester Roman Museum. Bigger artifacts were taken by the British Museum, of course. But that's a fascinating reflection how we are coming from one mother. We all belong to one family, we all belong to one mother. Simply the history is so long that we sometimes forget many pages of it. But if you look back, this is an amazing journey to when we were together as kids of one mother, and how we became different and how we became differently talented. But we come from the same root.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I think that's a lovely note to end on, that concept of hoping that this will be a catalyst for more, and that within these works of literature we will both see ourselves in it, but also experience the new as well. So I'd like to thank you all very much, panelists, for being here today. I would like to thank you, our audience, and have a good evening. Thank you. Last